I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Tonight, we're going to start with an update on our special report, Tainted Waters. We'll talk with the regional director of the EPA to find out what he thinks of the contamination of a huge aquifer in eastern Oregon and Oregon's lack of action to stop the pollution over the last 30 years. That is our big story tonight. We spent 5 nights this past November detailing how a huge aquifer in eastern Oregon is polluted. It's happening in northern Morrow and Umatilla counties. The state has known about this problem for at least 30 years and taken no steps that have stopped the pollution from getting worse. In the meantime, thousands of mostly low-income people who use backyard wells are exposed to often dangerous levels of nitrates in their water because they tap into that contaminated aquifer. The chemicals can cause several problems, including cancer after long exposure. Nitrates come from 3 main sources: from farming, animal feedlots, and commercial food processors. Various committees have met to discuss the problems for something like 30 years, and each time recommended voluntary changes in those industries to try and stop the pollution. But well testing has shown those steps have failed. The pollution is worse now than when it was first discovered. We'll hear from the EPA in a moment, but first an update. The Port of Morrow is one of the businesses spreading nitrate-contaminated water on farm fields near Boardman. It's not supposed to spread that water during the winter because there are a few plants growing to absorb the water, making it easier for nitrates to sink down through the soil to the aquifer. But the port has more water than it can store, so monitoring reports show it appears to have violated its permit over a dozen times in November and well over 100 times in December, spraying 219 million gallons of wastewater on fields around Boardman in December alone. Now, after our stories aired, we wanted to hear from the top environmental regulators. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality is in charge of clean water for our state. We've been asking for an interview with the director, Leah Felden, for 3 months, and now just heard back today that she will indeed sit down and talk with us, and we're thankful for that. We'll probably run a story with her in early March. We've also been asking for the same thing from the regional director of the EPA to see what the federal government says about all this. And this week, I did sit down with that administrator, Casey Sixkiller, to talk about the contamination.
You know, learning about this issue was one of the first things that I was briefed on when I came into this position in 2022. So to be able to go out there on the ground and actually meet with people that are being impacted by nitrates in their water was a really powerful moment. And I'm so thankful that people opened the doors and were willing to come yet again and share their stories and their frustrations. I think, you know, for me, the opportunity to hear directly from people and to see how much this issue cuts across so many barriers, and whether they're economic, cultural, racial, geographic, and you know, there aren't many issues like that anymore where people really can come together and fortunately or unfortunately find community in a shared voice asking for change.
And a lot of those voices that I've heard from say, why can't the government do more to stop the continued contamination?
Well, you know, the way that we've looked at this is sort of in two parts. You know, when I came in and people began to explain to me that this has been a challenge for 3 decades, you know, I said, first and foremost, this is an emergency and we need to treat it like an emergency. And that's, you know, number one, making sure people understand what nitrates in water means and the potential negative impacts to them, to their kids. 2 is understanding the ways in which they can begin to understand the extent to which their homes are being impacted by nitrates. And then 3, having access, of course, to water or filtration or both. So let's deal with the emergency that it is while really beginning to pull together all the different parts of the state and other local jurisdictions to address the long-term issues that we know folks are experiencing out there.
Casey Sixkiller grew up in the Seattle area, and he told me he often spent summers with relatives down here in Vancouver. As he mentioned, he personally visited the contaminated areas in eastern Oregon about this time last year. He told me he is aware the state of Oregon has stepped up its efforts to get wells tested and clean water to folks with contaminated wells in that problem area. Right. And we've seen some movement with notifying people that there might be a problem. The state's stepped up its testing, they've stepped up their water deliveries, but nobody's said anything about stopping the industry from polluting.
Well, first and foremost, that is a decision that really is made at the state level.
But if the state's not making it, can't the feds force it? Because you guys have the Clean Water Rights Act and all that.
Well, for us, again, I see this as an opportunity for us to engage and really explore all the different authorities that we have under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Thinking about what opportunities we have given the bipartisan infrastructure law to actually be part of the solution, part of the long-term solution of delivering safe and clean drinking water to these households. And frankly, holding accountable the state and others. In this instance, though, I am really appreciative of the fact that the state has come to the table. I can't speak for what that interaction was like before I got involved, but I'm encouraged that we now are beginning to see, after a lot of pushing by our agency, to actually have a plan. Not only plan to deal with the near-term issues, right, of testing and making sure folks have access to water, but also a plan to deal with the nitrates that we know exist in the groundwater today, and as you said, the continued application of those nitrates that we know are continuing to have an impact. All of that's going to require some big changes in the way businesses conduct their business, changes in the regulatory environment, or creating a stronger regulatory environment at the state level. But again, folks feel the fire. And I don't know if that's because we send some pretty strongly worded letters to the state or not. I'd like to believe it's because people are agreeing that after 3 decades, it's time to get the job done.
But people have been saying over those 3 decades, yes, this is a problem. Oh, yes, this is terrible. Oh, yes, we should study it some more. And it becomes 3 decades later. Is there any assurance that 10 years from now, we won't be having the same conversation?
Well, I don't know about the time frame in terms of when a very complex solution will be able to come forward, but I can tell you this, and it's the same thing I told the community members when I had the chance to meet with them. We're there now, and we're not going away. And I like to think of myself not as an impatient person, but when I see things like this, it's really important that we are transparent and that folks have an ability to hold us accountable. So, this is not a situation where I think we can wait another 3 decades. It's not a situation where we can wait another 10 years.
The Oregon Health Authority reports that a total of 424 households tonight are getting regular deliveries of clean bottled water paid for by taxpayers. Six Killers said EPA enforcement officials are now meeting every 3 months with Oregon leaders, talking about what is being done to fix the situation. He told me he will not be satisfied until the problem is solved, but he is encouraged to see movement from the state. Now to a big ruling from the top court in Oregon. The Oregon Supreme Court has ruled on Measure 113. They decided unanimously that the Oregon senators who boycotted the session last year cannot run for re-election when their term is done. Multiple walkouts by both parties in the Oregon Senate over the years have stopped the legislative sessions in their tracks. That happens because Oregon has a unique quorum law that requires 20 of the 30 senators be present before any action can be taken. Voter frustration over the walkouts led to an initiative, Measure 113, that punishes lawmakers who have 10 or more unexcused absences by keeping them from running for re-election. The measure was an attempt to stop the walkouts. It did not work, by the way. Last year, 9 Republicans and 1 independent in the Senate staged a record-breaking 6-week walkout. Then they challenged Measure 113 in court. Today, the Supremes denied that challenge and ruled they cannot run for re-election when their current term is up. I had a chance today to speak to the leader of the Senate Republicans, that's Tim Knopp. He led the walkout and is one of the senators now barred from running for re-election.
And they barred 10 Republicans from running for office this cycle and next. It's about half and half. So we will continue to serve and do the best we can under the limitations that have been provided.
Will you appeal this?
I will personally not be appealing this particular decision. There are other members who are suing at a federal level on free speech grounds. And I wish them much success, but that is very lengthy process, it's a very expensive process, and it doesn't impact the 2024 elections, which is why we went the route that we did through the state Supreme Court.
Okay. It must be disappointing for you.
Well, sure. I mean, you always want the opportunity to be able to make your own decisions on whether you can run or not, and the court has made that for us, and I understand the ballot measure, but the ballot measure says you can't, you can't run in the election that is after your current term has expired, and this election is before our current term expires. So we didn't think that in the English language it would apply, but the court has made a different determination.
Yeah. So looking back, was it worth it?
We had a caucus this morning with Senate Republican caucus, and I think to a person they do believe that it was worth it, because the principle of standing for the rule of law and Senate rules, and that you have to follow those rules, is why the walkout occurred in the first place. And we did that, and we caused the majority party Democrats to negotiate in the end, which they said they wouldn't do. And what we wanted is for them to follow the law and for them to be bipartisan. So, they were operating in what we believed was an unlawful, unconstitutional, and uncompromising way. And we were able to change that. And so we think that was a victory on principle. And I think most of our members, if you talk to them, would say they would do it again. I think they probably all would, quite frankly.
Now, later in our conversation, I asked if a walkout was on the table for this upcoming short session that starts on Monday. Knopp said he doesn't think that's going to happen this time around, but he did not rule it out for legislative sessions of the future. So we'll see. So what do you think about that? Did the Republicans get what they deserve? Do you think it'll prohibit future walkouts? Let me know, will you? Shoot us an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number's 503-226-5090. Coming up next on The Story, Portland City Council took some big steps this week in order to make the Rose City a little more inviting to developers to build here, especially when it comes to new housing. From tax breaks to pausing some regulations that builders have long complained about, we'll explain what's changing and when The Story returns. It's no secret that housing is a priority here in Oregon. In fact, Governor Tina Kotek is only proposing one bill during this year's short session, and it's all about housing production. She wants to spur it, and she wants it to happen fast. But this week, Portland City Council took matters into its own hands, unanimously passing a package of new policies meant to make Portland more attractive to developers.
We have a housing shortage and a housing crisis, so it's on us as well as all of our jurisdictional partners to figure out what is our role and how can we maximize our role to catalyze that development.
Alex Jensen joins me now. Alex is on KGW's digital team, but before joining us, she spent several years focusing on the city's housing development, permitting, and pretty much everything in between. Alex, what are the specifics of this new deal?
Yeah, so the overarching goal here is to lower the cost of building new homes in Portland and accelerating housing production in these regulations. And these regulations are not earth-shattering, and the public may not even notice a difference walking along the street, but they cut some of the red tape that developers have long complained about here. This deal took nearly a year to come together. One of the biggest parts of this is a tax break expansion for some new apartment buildings. This only applies to buildings that are subject to inclusionary housing requirements, which mandates that new buildings with 20 or more units make a certain amount of them affordable. The tax breaks are meant to offset the financial losses for developers on those reduced rent units. A recent study found that tax breaks before this package balanced out for developers in the central city, but they were losing money in other higher cost areas like Northwest Portland. So in essence, these new rules try to ensure that developers are not burdened by these cities' affordable housing policies.
It used to be builders would take that risk because Portland was a big investment. If you talk to anyone who does capital investments, you'll see that Portland's pretty much at the bottom of the list right now. We're not attracting capital investment right now. So it is our duty to provide some incentives, and we're just probably not going to magically see a housing boom and building of homes.
The other part of this release package temporarily relaxed 13 zoning and permitting requirements, things that builders have said increase costs or delay housing production. It includes things like bike parking requirements in the new buildings. There won't need to be as much now. Builders will also be allowed to include residential units on the ground floor, and they even suspend some requirements for holding neighborhood meetings. The other new rules are things that add to costs, but are small details in the grand scheme of housing production. But there was some controversy in this deal relating to two amendments that did not pass. One would have waived a requirement to have a special coating on windows to prevent bird crashes. That will still be required. The other would remove a requirement for eco roofs or green roofs on new buildings over 20,000 square feet. Builders will have to keep doing that too. City councilors noted that these cases in weighing an environment against the huge need for housing.
This is where we are. It's a housing crisis, and of course we care about the environment, and sometimes you have to make tough choices.
City Council did make it clear that this way would be the first step towards attracting builders, and more relief for that industry could be on the way.
I do have deep concerns that it was somewhat of a missed opportunity. We could have gone further. We didn't go far enough.
We still have a lot of work left to do to accelerate housing production. This set of regulatory relief measures provides what I believe are meaningful cost reductions, important administrative streamlining, and time savings for housing projects in Portland.
All of these new rules will take effect March 1st, a month from today. In the newsroom, Alex Jensen, KGW News.
All right, thank you, Alex. Let's now get to some of your comments on Evan Watson's big story last night regarding Multnomah County's ambulance crisis. Basically, the provider AMR is falling far short of response time standards, and they blame the county's 2 paramedic requirement on that. And as bad as things are, they probably are going to get worse because AMR is losing paramedics in Multnomah County faster than they can hire them. As is the case with many of our comments in the past, Evan has done many of your comments in the past when Evan has done this story. You think the county needs to make a change?
I think for the time being, maybe a paramedic and an EMT would be all right as long as we have ambulances on the street and they're helping people. I don't want to have to calendar when is the best time for me to have an emergency. I want to know that if I call or if someone calls on my behalf, an ambulance will be there. So let's see if we can get the county to get this done. Their bullheadedness is not helping at all.
All right, thank you, Michael. Ann wrote in to us to say, Multnomah County is shooting its residents in the foot by requiring 2 paramedics. What do the stats from other places with 1 paramedic and 1 EMT show? Multnomah County is the densest county, all the more urgent to solve this problem. Sure seems like 1 of each is the way to go. Let's get going with this yesterday. Well, Evan previously did cover some of the AMR response times in neighboring counties that only require 1 paramedic and 1 EMT, so let's take a look at that. This graph shows in Clark County, Washington AMR got to emergencies around 85% of the time in 2023. Clackamas County around 80%, Washington County around 70%. Here in Multnomah County with the 2 paramedic requirement, that number is down to 60%. Now, a few of you emailed possible solutions apart from getting rid of that requirement. Casey wrote, what about bringing in extra folks from different states, much like firefighters or line workers do in emergent times? And Steve chimed in. The solution, a taxing district that combines ambulance and fire the same way it's done in other Oregon communities and elsewhere throughout the nation. Seems to work well, and there's a long list of people applying to be firefighters. Some are paramedics and some EMTs. Interesting stuff. Thanks for all your feedback, and please keep it coming. Up next now on the story, we'll take you to Olympia, where a state lawmaker there reveals a secret she's held for years regarding her battle with substance use. It's a story that shows addiction is not just a problem on the streets, it seeps into every part of our communities. Stick around for that when the story returns. We've talked a lot about addiction and hard drugs this week on the story, especially around the Portland area. But this next story was going to take us to the state of Washington, inside the Capitol building, in fact, in Olympia. A state lawmaker there is sharing a long-held secret in the hope of inspiring others and spurring the state to do more for those in recovery. Here's Drew Mickelson with the story.
What is our goal for salmon?
Public speaking. It's part of the job as a state legislator.
No, I just need to take a minute to just breathe.
But Representative Deborah Lekanoff is about to reveal something she's never said publicly.
I'm a fresh recovering addict who came out of recovery just a few months ago. I don't think I would have stepped into recovery and continued the work I'm doing today unless I realized I wasn't alone.
One of only a handful of Native American legislators in state history, Lekanoff passed laws to eliminate Native American mascots in schools.
Billy taught me the word of courage.
And was behind the effort to get a statue honoring civil rights hero Billy Frank Jr. to represent Washington at the U.S. Capitol. But her priority this year, help those battling addiction, just like herself. She quit drinking last summer.
I think my time that I really realized that I was an addict and I needed help was when I realized there were days I couldn't leave my house. Were there days when I was alone? Or the look from my daughter's eyes of seeing the ultimate disappointment.
Under a package of bills she calls Heal One Washington, Lekanoff wants the state to follow the lead of the tribes who have built wellness centers to help their members, along with the general public, facing addiction. Her proposals would build more facilities and boost support for drug and mental health services.
So for 52 years, I didn't know who I was or what my purpose was, and I didn't know that there was something wrong with me. But it really wasn't something wrong. It was the fact that I had an illness.
She fears sharing her secret could hurt relationships and damage her reputation at the Capitol. And she also worries about the impact on the state's Native Americans.
I hear this all the time. Those natives, they're just addicts. Should have assimilated them, should have done away with them. History shows that. But I'm sitting here in the state legislature recognizing and understanding that I can rise above that stereotype, that stigma of being Native American, that stigma and stereotype of being an addict.
She hopes coming forward and fighting for those just like herself will inspire others to speak up and get help.
And make sure that the next generation from now, the next mom, won't have their daughter look at them and wonder whether or not they're going to wake up the next day, because that mom has the courage to say, I need help.
It's a story of strength. Drew Mickelson reporting there. That's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our story, that never ends. The good stuff's coming your way next. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.